Every border, law, and rivalry in modern Europe was engineered, not by chance, but by empire after empire, each laying down a blueprint the next would inherit or resist. Roads crossing France still follow Roman paths from 2,000 years ago. The line dividing France from Germany was drawn by three brothers in 843. To understand today's Europe, you have to start with the empire that wrote its first laws. Roman power left its mark on Europe in stone, in law, and in the very roots that crossed the continent. In the 6th century, Emperor Justinian ordered the codification of centuries of Roman statutes, creating the Corpus Juris Civilis in 534. This monumental legal code did not just organize Roman life, it set the template for how laws would be written, taught, and enforced across Europe for centuries. Later rulers, from Napoleon to the architects of the German Civil Code, drew directly from Justinian's text, citing Roman jurists like Gaius and Ulpian in their own legal commentaries. Today, the legal DNA of the Corpus Juris Civilis runs through the civil codes of France, Italy, Germany, and Spain, shaping everything from property rights to contracts. But the Roman blueprint was not just legal, it was physical. By the height of imperial rule, Roman engineers had mapped and paved an astonishing 299,171 kilometers of roads, linking cities from Britannia to the Black Sea. Modern GIS studies show that nearly a third of today's major highways in regions like northern Italy and the Rhone-Alps corridor still follow the paths first carved out by Roman surveyors. In Spain, the ancient Via Augusta aligns for over 200 kilometers with the medieval Camino Real, showing how trade and movement kept to Roman lines long after the legions left. Cities like Lyon, Cologne, and Mainz trace their urban cores and street grids back to Roman colonia, their charters echoing Roman municipal law. The map of Europe's roads and the language of its courts both bear the imprint of an empire that designed systems to last. Successive powers would inherit, adapt, and retrofit these foundations, but the original Roman template remains visible beneath the surface of modern Europe. Charlemagne's coronation as emperor on December 25, 800, revived the idea of a unified European authority, but the reality on the ground was far more complex. His government borrowed Roman structures, imperial titles, written laws, and a network of royal envoys known as missi dominici. But these were layered onto a patchwork of tribal customs and regional loyalties. Charlemagne's capitularies set out rules for everything from land management to church discipline, aiming to impose order across a vast territory stretching from the Pyrenees to the Elbe. Yet even as he built this imperial shell, the underlying divisions remained. The stability unraveled after his death. The Treaty of Verdun, signed on August 10, 843, split the empire among his grandsons. Three kingdoms emerged: West Francia, East Francia, and a central strip running from the North Sea to Italy. The outlines of modern France and Germany began to take shape, while the Middle Kingdom fractured into contested zones like Lorraine and Burgundy. These new borders reflected not just family compromise, but the persistence of local identities, languages, and rivalries that Roman unity had only partially contained. Over time, the Holy Roman Empire inherited this plural map. By the 14th century, the Golden Bull of 1356 formalized a decentralized system where 7 prince-electors chose the emperor. Power shifted to dukes, bishops, and city-states, each guarding their own laws and privileges. The result was a federation of overlapping jurisdictions, part Roman revival, part medieval invention. This territorial mosaic set the stage for centuries of disputes and alliances, and it explains why the political divide between France and Germany and the fragmented German lands would echo through European history long after the last emperor laid down his crown. Ottoman rule in southeastern Europe introduced a new logic of governance that cut across the patchwork of medieval borders. Instead of forcing religious unity, the Ottomans organized their empire through the millet system, registering entire communities by faith in detailed tax registers called defters. By the mid-1500s, these records show that non-Muslim millets, Greek Orthodox, Armenian, and Jewish, made up about 2 million people, or 1/5 of the empire's population. Each millet ran its own schools, courts, and places of worship, collecting taxes internally and sending a share to the central treasury. Fiscal records from the Balkans reveal that the sizye, an annual tax on non-Muslims, brought in the equivalent of 180 tons of silver in the 1540s and in the 1550s. This steady revenue stream helped fund roads, caravanserais, and the Ottoman bureaucracy. The millet framework allowed diverse communities to persist side by side, shaping the plural character of the Balkans that survives in today's patchwork of nations and faiths. Meanwhile, on Europe's western edge, the Spanish and Portuguese crowns were transforming the continent's economy through the relentless import of American silver. The Casa de Contratación in Seville tracked the flow. Between 1520 and 1575, Spanish ports received between 150 and 200 tons of silver each year. In peak years like 1556, that figure reached over 200 tons. This sudden surge of bullion triggered the price revolution, with prices rising across Europe and new fortunes fueling banks from Genoa to Antwerp. Silver coins minted in Spain and Portugal spread through trade routes to the Mediterranean and the Low Countries and even as far as London. The influx of wealth shifted the economic center of gravity northward, encouraging the rise of manufacturing and finance in regions that would later drive Europe's global expansion. Plural legal and fiscal systems in the East and a wave of silver-driven economic change in the West both set the stage for the next wave of imperial standardization. 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte ordered a sweeping overhaul of French law. The Napoleonic Code, as it became known, replaced a patchwork of feudal statutes with a single, accessible legal system. Property rights, contracts, and civil status were all spelled out in clear language. This code did not stay within France's borders. As Napoleon's armies advanced, the code spread to Belgium, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, Western Germany, and even Poland. Its influence reached Spain and Portugal, and later inspired legal reforms as far east as Russia and as far south as Latin America. By the mid-19th century, a map of civil law in Europe closely followed the old path of French expansion, with the Code serving as a model for new national legal systems. The Napoleonic Code's insistence on equality before the law and the abolition of inherited privilege set a new standard for citizenship and governance. While French legal ideas were redrawing the map of rights, Britain was transforming the continent's economy. The steam engine, perfected by James Watt in the late 18th century, powered a surge in manufacturing and transport. Between 1800 and 1850, Britain's coal output jumped from 10 million to 50 million tons a year. Steam-powered mills and locomotives multiplied, driving down the cost of goods and shrinking travel times. British factories exported textiles, machinery, and capital across Europe, while the Bank of England's model of central banking became the backbone of modern finance. By the 1850s, industrial output in Britain outstripped that of any continental rival, and London's financial markets set interest rates for much of the world. The combination of codified law and industrial power created a new template for modern states, one based on standardized rules, technological innovation, and the ability to mobilize resources at scale. Imperial balance in Europe cracked open from the east and center. In the late 18th century, Catherine the Great and her allies wiped Poland-Lithuania off the map through 3 partitions between 1772 and 1795. Each round carved away land and people. First, 92,000 square kilometers and 3.5 million subjects vanished from the Commonwealth, divided among Russia, Austria, and Prussia. By 1795, the last Polish king abdicated, and more than 10 million people had been absorbed into new imperial provinces. Russian administrators imposed new laws, conscription, and tax systems from Minsk to Vilnius, while Prussia and Austria reorganized their shares to boost their own military and economic strength. These partitions redrew the map, creating new borderlands and fueling future nationalist tensions. Meanwhile, in the heart of Central Europe, Prussia engineered a different kind of takeover. The Zollverein, launched in 1834, united dozens of German states into a single customs union. Trade within this bloc exploded by over 300% in 3 decades, with coal, iron, and textiles flowing freely across borders. Customs revenues soared from 25 million to 150 million taler by 1866. This economic engine gave Prussia the leverage to drive political unification. On January 18, 1871, Otto von Bismarck proclaimed the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. A new industrial power now stood at the center of Europe, upending the old order and accelerating the race for military and territorial security. The gunshots in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914 shattered the balance of Europe and set off a chain reaction that old imperial systems could not contain. By the end of the First World War, 4 empires, German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian, had collapsed. The map was redrawn at Versailles, producing 6 major successor states from imperial fragments: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Austria, Hungary, and the Baltic republics. New borders carved through mixed populations, leaving behind disputes and fragile governments. Where empires once ruled by decree, the post-war order tried a new experiment. Nation-states recognized by international law, each claiming legitimacy through treaties rather than conquest. But the patchwork proved unstable. Economic crises and nationalist rivalries threatened to pull the continent back toward old patterns of conflict. In the ruins of this system, a different idea took hold. On March 25, 1957, 6 countries, France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, signed the Treaty of Rome. The European Economic Community was not an empire, but a voluntary union built on law, negotiation, and mutual benefit. Robert Schuman, a key architect, argued that only a shared framework could prevent the return of coercion and war. The community's founding treaty created common institutions and a single market, setting a precedent for integration by consent rather than force. Treaty-based cooperation replaced imperial ambition, laying the foundation for a Europe that would be bound together not by conquest, but by choice. Europe's map today is still shaped by decisions made centuries ago, visible in laws, borders, and alliances that outlast their empires. As new crises test unity and identity, understanding these deep-rooted blueprints is not just history, it is essential for navigating the next chapter. What patterns will future generations inherit?